Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Firm Returns podcast. This time I'm going to be having a look at the write-up I've just released on the 24th of March, which is last Friday at the time of recording, which is a write-up of tinyBuild. So let's start with the business overview as usual. So tinyBuild is a video game developer and publisher with global operations headquartered in the US. The company listed on the alternative investment market, AIM, of the London Stock Exchange in March 2021 for a price of £1.69 per share, equating to a market capitalisation at the time of £340 million. After rising to lofty heights of £2.93 at its peak, the share price has plummeted to 51p, meaning the whole company is valued at just £103 million. Quite a substantial, so about a third of what it IPO'd for, and about less than a fifth of what the highest point was for the share price. So, moving away from what the stock is telling us. What the stock market is telling us to the business itself, I'll now cover a little of the company's history and its current business model. They started off developing and self-publishing their own games, then expanded into offering publishing services to third-party developers. After doing this for a number of years, they realized that third-party publishing is not a sustainable business. It is dependent on the success of individual titles, which comes intermittently. When a title is successful, the developer is often snapped up by a larger entity which will then gain the benefit of subsequent releases around the already proven IP. In addition, should the developer choose to stay with the publisher for future releases, development efforts are limited to the capacity of the original development team. Learning from this experience, tinyBuild has moved towards a model of acquiring the IP of successful titles and thus becoming a first and second party publisher. It does this primarily through acquire hires, whereby it purchases the game IP while simultaneously hiring the development team. And it doesn't necessarily actually want the corporate entity of the developer itself. So it's not a sort of standard acquisition of having that as then a subsidiary. It actually sort of absorbs, takes the IP, brings it on, puts an asset on the balance sheet, and then it basically contracts out the development team. We'll go more into that in a bit. So the deals are usually structured with an equity component, so the developers remain invested in the success of the game. We'll explore some examples of such deals later. Ownership of the IP increases profit margins and allows the company to expand a single game into a multi-game and multimedia franchise. It has successfully done so with Hello Neighbor, which now has multiple games of different genres across a multitude of platforms, as well as graphic novels and an animated TV series. There are two other games in the company's portfolio for which it intends to pursue the same strategy, namely Streets of Rogue and Totally Reliable Delivery Service. So Streets of Rogue has already got a sequel, which will be the sort of first in the multi-game series. And I think there's a sequel being developed for Totally Reliable Delivery Service as well. So Streets of Rogue is, you can look at these yourself, but this is very popular, very basic indie game. I think just one guy developed it, and it's what you would class as a roguelite. So you're moving through series of levels, and when you die, you restart back from the beginning again. Very unique game. Very enjoyable, particularly playing with multiple people in co-op and so on. The sequel they're doing is going to be a bit of a twist on it. It's more of an open world type one, but still in the sort of top-down pixel graphics style of the original. And I think you see that with the Hello Neighbor, which we're going to go into a bit more detail. They've trying to spread out with the new games. There'll be sort of standard games, like I think the Hello Neighbor 2 is very much like the first game. I've not played either of them, but they've done sort of auxiliary titles that are kind of different genres. So like Secret Neighbor is like a kind of games as a service model where it's all purely online multiplayer, going round. One of you plays as the neighbour in disguise, and then the rest of you are all kids trying to get around the house and unlock things and evade him and so on. And then and they've also done like a kind of I guess base building or something like that type game, the Hello Engineer. And I think similar kind of thing. They're trying to do this type of thing when they build up these sort of franchises. It's opportunities to bring out a bit like Nintendo will with the Mario IP or whatever. They'll have Mario Kart. They'll have the standard platformer kind of Mario game. They'll have other ones that are a bit more sort of tactical RPG style ones where you move around, or all manner of different type of games to suit the different kind of people. But the main thing is they all share the same IP that draws people in. Oh, it's Mario. And that's what same kind of thing that applies to like Warner Brothers Discovery or whatever. When if you own the IP like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings or whatever, Game of Thrones, stuff like that, you've got so many that automatically just draws people in. Just the fact that just the IP itself and having that sort of franchise is really crucial. That's what makes games that can often be quite similar in terms of the dynamics. There are a lot of competitors, but having the actual IP that people know or something, when people are trying to choose, often they're drawn to it, and that's the value of owning already established IP. Right, so let's have a look. So alongside more traditional game releases, the company has recently expanded out into games as a service, GaaS, and with the acquire hire of Bad Pixel. So I say this, but they obviously also had a bit of a games as a service thing going on with some of the one of the Hello Neighbor games, the Secret Neighbor one. But yeah, they've expanded that now with the acquire hire of Bad Pixel, and they are the developers of Deadside, a first-person post-apocalyptic shooter and survival game. So this is if you've played games like what do they call it? The standard. It's a kind of a bit of a Fortnite, that type. Not exactly, but it much more. I can't. I think I'm blanking on the name now, but there's quite a few games already established in this kind of area. But this one's trying to be, and it fits in with this nice sort of first-person shooter going around, playing against other players. There's some AI in there as well, who are apparently quite difficult, and there's sort of base building elements to it, and some cool things like if somebody dies, there's a chance of them dropping like a kind of card that it's like a tag that tells you where, because they'll respawn potentially back at their base that they've been building. It tells you the location of that base, and I think it's like a raid ticket or something like that. And then the bases, which are normally areas that are kind of safe spaces, if somebody dies and they're out in the open and they drop this thing, then that becomes like a target that everybody can attack. It's publicized, and it for the next hour or something, that base is then eligible to be attacked, and you can do like a siege type attack on it or what have you, raid on it. So yeah, it's some interesting dynamics. It looks really good. It looks like the kind of game I would like to play, but for lack of time. But yeah, it's great, and since and we'll go on here, but since they actually acquired this company, they've taken the initial concept, which is already doing well, and started to plow a bit more money into it, expand the development team from just 7 developers to I think 20 now, or as of their last reporting, and they've been able to, with that injection of cash, they've been able to add particular features and massively and market it better, and they've really significantly grown the player base just in the first few months since they owned the IP. So and I'm sort of saying that here, and so this game is still in early access, but has significantly grown its player base since tinyBuild acquired the IP and began deploying its resources towards it. And then, which is what I was saying there, and as of March last year, so March 2022, when the company's financial year 2021 annual report was published, it was their best-selling game on Steam. Yeah, it's got a lot of reason, but it's only on Steam at the moment, and like I say, early access, so it's kind of like this beta stage where they're getting feedback. People pay a lower price to get the game at this early stage, and then when it matures, they'll get the full copy or whatever in the future. But it still is all the fully online games as a service kind of model at the moment, massively MMO as well. Let's have a look. So the company has also developed. Yeah, sorry, that's just what I was saying there. The company has also developed a game within the Hello Neighbor franchise that fits the games as a service model, Secret Neighbor. Yeah, as I said. And an iOS version of this game was released largely for marketing purposes, which topped the charts with 4 million downloads in the first few days. Yeah, so it's I mean, I think overall the Hello Neighbor franchise, as of the last sort of reported amount they said was, I think the first game totaled something like 70 million downloads. It really blew up, and it's quite an interesting story because when that game was originally released back in, I think, 2016, it was just a complete flop, and this was before the company owned it, and they basically did the old acquire hire model. They saw the potential of it, and it received terrible like critical reviews and so on, but they bought the IP, the game, and they put the development team on and reworked it a bit, and then did another release in 2017, and it sort of just became a big hit, and it's something that works. It's a game, and a particularly it's a game that works well with the sort of influencer. It's something that influencers can play through, and it really draws a lot of people. We'll get onto all that stuff later, but yeah, the message they're doing, and the iOS stuff, like, you know, in this case, making a game for iPhones, largely for marketing purposes, and they're not making any money from it. It's a completely free game, but it draws people in. It just expands the value of the brand, in this case Hello Neighbor and so on, and expands it out, and it just overall just getting more and more eyes on this thing, and more and more people knowing the Hello Neighbor brand and franchise means future releases are just the chances of them being successful just increases and increases. It compounds on itself. Let's have a look. So the multiplayer games as a service model has the potential to create games with extreme longevity and play times that are orders of magnitude greater than linear games. This is an area in which the board has considerable experience, with the CEO being an ex-pro gamer and a non-executive director who was previously co-president of Activision Blizzard, the original games as a service and MMO company. Yeah, so it's interesting and then in one of the earnings calls, the CEO was talking about this. I mean, he has something like, he was saying he's got, it said most people can't fathom this, but he's got something like 20 games in his library which he's put more than 1,000 hours into, and they're always in this games as a service model. And you know, it's like people, and for instance with the Activision Blizzard, you've got the World of Warcraft. People have been playing that for well over a decade at this point, and it's still really loyal, popular fan base, and raking in the money for it. They're new releases every year or more frequently, and people just still craving it. And I think once you get one of these established IPs that really have these people that, I mean, and obviously with Activision Blizzard, they've also got the Call of Duty, and one of their most successful games of recent years has been Call of Duty Warzone, which is a free-to-play online one, very much in the game as a service model. And like the CEO mentioned, he's put over 1,000 hours into that one as well. So it's probably one of his most played games right now. Just this idea that you compare it to the standard game. Maybe like you just play through the campaign of a normal type of game, you get about 30 hours, it's done. There's not really much replayability there. It's unlikely people would go over 100 hours on most games. They're just sort of the standard linear model. It's where you have replay bit, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a game as a service. Like games are like I was saying, like the roguelite type games where you die and you come back and restart from the beginning, and you sort of maybe there's some sort of stuff that persists between each run and so on. Those kind of games can be quite addictive, and people do it. Or like other games like simulator type games like Stardew Valley or whatever, being one of the most popular ones, where you could just put hundreds or thousands of hours into those, and they just anyway, trying to pursue that kind of model, I think is really a good direction for any kind of games publisher, because it really locks people in, and you just clock those hours, and you can and monetizing that, it just extends the life of the game. If you've got, I mean, it's the same thing with this is what gives Paradox Interactive such a high valuation. For instance, their strategy games can last many years if they're hit ones, like Europa and Hearts of Iron and sort of Crusader Kings, stuff like that. Those games and Victoria, 2 or 3 or whatever, those kind of games really do have a lot of longevity to them. People playing them for many years because they are just sort of very long-term games. Those kind of strategy games, very replayable, and the game plays out completely differently on different runs, and that's the key, I think. That's really the best model for games, really, for where you don't have that getting away from the cycle of with your standard little AAA games where you put a game out and the sales just drop off dramatically after the first initial sales period, a couple of months or whatever, and then you just get a little boost whenever you have like a sale in the future, but generally there's not really much persistency beyond a year. If you can get games, and I mean I'm going to talk about this in a bit, but even like some of these indie games and stuff like that, like I was saying, the roguelite ones and stuff, are still like top sellers, even like a decade on. It's just crazy, and especially when you the AAA with the indie games as well. Like graphics is, with the AAA games, people are just striving for the next graphical, amazing, better and better graphics and performance and what have you, better visuals, and that stuff's always improving. So a game soon looks dated, and people soon moving on from it. And whereas when you get the sort of the more independent developers, sort of indie games, pixel art and so on, those things can last for a very long time without because they were never striving to be this visually amazing thing. Well, the pixel art is quite beautiful on its own, but it's a very different style. It's not trying to be super realistic or anything. But anyway, let's have a look. So on the subject of longevity, it's also worth mentioning that many of the company's most successful indie titles are still making significant contributions to overall sales, with some appearing in the top 10 daily bestsellers even after a decade. This really sets these games apart from AAA games whose sales drop off dramatically after the initial release, and removes a lot of the cyclicality from the business results. To put this into figures for you, the company's back catalogue contributed 83% of revenue in financial year 2021, which was a record for the company. So yeah, it just shows you if you can get with developers of these sort of more smaller, not the non AAA games. These games can, and Tiny will sort of back catalogue here, producing 83%. And I think in H1 2021 it was like 99% back catalogue. But the CEO has mentioned that this is a bit, because they release a lot of their games early access as well, this sometimes can be a bit misleading, because a game might be in early access for over a year and going through various sort of stages before the later release, and it might just be released onto consoles and a fresh thing, but it's still a fresh release, which then brings in loads of sales, but it's still counted as back catalogue because it's actually an older game that's just been ported across or just left the beta stage effectively, but it was still being sold while in that early access sort of beta stage. So it's a bit misleading, but yeah, just the general principle that a lot of these games are older than a year, and they're still contributing substantially to the company, and when it's doing these acquire hires and so on, it's acquiring that IP each time. Those games are generally living on for multiple years and continuing to produce for the company. Like tinyBuild, still a top seller for not tinyBuild. Streets of Rogue, still a top seller for the company, and they even after it's been around for quite a long time. Graveyard Keeper is another example. Yeah, we've got some great ones. So let's have a look. Games usually begin life on PC gaming platforms like Steam or Epic Games, but successful titles will be ported to other platforms in order to reach the widest possible audience. This includes PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo Switch consoles, as well as mobile and VR. So they've got one VR game, which I forgot to mention, in the Hello Neighbor franchise. So yeah, expanding out onto new platforms. And this also includes like the Steam Deck and so on. And I think the key point I'm trying to make here is that the company is very much technology agnostic. Their games, and they're very happy for all these competitors, because it means that they can get great deals, like I'm going to mention here, getting like put into subscription bundles for like Xbox Games Pass, for instance, with Microsoft, or similar things with other ones, and on the PlayStation and so on. So they get quite good deals because these companies are all and the more competitors come into the space, the more ways they're able to reach players, and the better sort of deals they're able to get. So having new innovative consoles and stuff like that is not something that scares the company off at all. If the metaverse really comes in and VR starts becoming a great way, that's not a threat to the company at all. It's an opportunity for them to expand, because their games will transfer across to whatever medium. So yeah, more recently, tinyBuild has started signing deals with companies like Microsoft to bundle games into their subscription services, e.g. Xbox Games Pass. So many of the strategies mentioned help to de-risk game releases. For example, producing new games in an established franchise greatly increases the chance of success. Equally, when developing new IP, starting with a single platform, e.g. Steam, and releasing the game in early access allows the company to test the waters and receive feedback from gamers while the game is still in development, before committing major capital to its release. Pre-signing deals with platforms has also become a strategy used by management to secure upfront funding and de-risk development. This predominantly applies to new releases in existing franchises. So yeah, if like so they'll be signing deals with sort of back catalogue things. Game just to sort of get Microsoft wants to fill out their Xbox Games Pass with lots of games to attract people to get it. And a lot of sort of back catalogue games might be put in on deals with that, which is a great way to squeeze some extra money out of them, and while they're still popular. But yeah, just give it another source of revenue for it. And then you've got but then the new releases, like you've got, when you start getting franchises like Hello Neighbor, which they already know is, I think the new Hello Neighbor 2, just the beta, had more downloads than the original game. More downloads just in the few weeks that the beta was out than the original game had in its whole life. So this the power of the franchise there, the people have got established within the brand and looking out for the next title in the series. That's very attractive to companies like Microsoft, whatever, that want to draw people to their subscription services. If they can say, oh, the next game in the Hello Neighbor franchise is on here, or whatever, or any other franchises that the company develops over time. Yeah, it's a great option now that's starting to present itself more as its IP expands in popularity. But like I say, also an option for some of their sort of back catalogue games, which sell well, and Microsoft wants to or other services want to bundle in with their subscription things. I'm guessing like a Nintendo Online might be something else that they could look at, and I don't know whether PlayStation has a similar sort of thing to the Xbox Game Pass. So finally on the business overview, we've got something else worth mentioning is that the company has a 49% stake in DevGam LLC, an Eastern European focused game development conference founded and run by the CEO's wife, Lerica Malayeva, who retains 51% ownership. In 2021, the conference had around 1,800 companies attend from nearly 40 different countries. So that was a bit of a mix of, depending on COVID restrictions, online and in person. But their events are definitely well attended from the pictures you can see of them. And it's the fact that they're Eastern. I mean, the company's focus on, I don't think I mentioned this in here, but the company's focus on access because of we'll get onto it, but the founder, I believe, is Russian, the CEO, and certainly there's a lot of he's got very close links to Eastern European countries and so on, and that's only a small part of their overall business operations. They are globally distributed. They've got people in other more developed European countries. They've got teams in North America. They've got teams in South America. They've got teams all over. But the Eastern European presence is a really thriving market for game development. A lot of great games coming out of Eastern Europe, and a lot of great development teams, Eastern Europe and Russia and so on. And actually having access to that, a lot of the bigger companies, haven't necessarily got that connection to Eastern Europe that allows them to get access to these things. So the companies, and with this gaming conference is a really amazing way for them to really break in and get access to these, and holding these events in Eastern Europe is it's incredible to get access to these up and coming markets that a lot of the bigger sort of US developers or whatever wouldn't have. But obviously the company is based in Delaware in the US, but like I say, globally distributed. So for accounting purposes, DevGam is treated as a subsidiary, and so profits owed to the other party are shown in the income statement as non-controlling interests. Lerica was paid $148,000 in a dividend by the subsidiary during H1 2022. So I've had some people feedback and say they're a bit confused by what I was sort of saying here. So just to try and make it a bit clearer. So she is treated as a subsidiary because previously the company owned a majority stake. But she actually, Lerica Malayeva, actually runs the company. She's the CEO of DevGam LLC. And as a part of it, conditional on her remaining with running the company, her stake was increased up to 51%. So she's actually has the sort of the controlling stake there, but that's conditional on her staying with it. If she left and tries to go off elsewhere and just becomes a passive shareholder of DevGam LLC, then that would reduce, and the tinyBuild would become the majority owner again. So a little bit complex, and like the dividend in this case being paid out was, I imagine, probably the way she's taking her salary as the owner. It probably makes more sense to have it sort of structured like that from a sort of tax purposes and so on. So I hope that clears that up. So let's have a look at M&A, merger and acquisition. So I outlined the company's M&A strategy earlier, so let's now have a look at some recent examples. tinyBuild was very busy in 2021 with 7 acquisitions for a total upfront payment of $25.5 million in cash and shares. These included Weir 5, maker of the developer of the Totally Reliable Delivery Service, and Hungry Couch, Black Sky developer of Black Skylands in February, Doghelm, which is Streets of Rogue, in June, and Animal, which is a developer of Rawmen, in August. all these deals involved the purchase of the game IP and bringing the development teams on board as contractors. So the standard kind of acquire hire model the company employs. Then had a slightly different type of transaction, more of an acquisition of an actual company rather than acquire hire. So in 2020, September of 2021, the company made its most ambitious acquisition to date of Versus Evil, a US-based publisher, and its subsidiary Red Cerberus, a gaming services provider. It provides quality assurance. That's the main service they provide. The intent with this acquisition was to expand the company's publishing capacity and also to vertically integrate quality assurance into the company, thus reducing dependence on external providers. So, something to mention here, and I possibly mention it later on, but Versus Evil is largely a third-party publisher, so the gross margins aren't quite as good, and I know all the aforementioned problems we were talking about with not owning the IP, not being able to do everything you can with it, and having successful titles, not being able to expand them out, and not necessarily being able to keep to publish sequels and subsequent releases within a given franchise or within a given IP, because they've got the option to move to other publishers. So yeah, it is an inferior model, and now that they've acquired Versus Evil, they're going to transition them to being a lot, going along with the tinyBuild model. So future releases, any particular good ones, they'll be trying to bring that IP on board. So after having teams that they've been working with, and now that they've got Versus Evil, they've got all of the previous development teams that they've got relationships with and so on, are all potential candidates for acquisition. So really expanded out the pool of talent they can draw on, and businesses they can acquire. I mean, it really should be emphasized. I mean, tinyBuild should appeal very much to anybody that likes the sort of what do they call it, the acquisition train type business, the roll up type business, having going around an industry and acquiring all the smaller players. And everybody touts Constellation Software, for instance, or Kelly Partners Group with the accounting. So it's very much the similar kind of thing, picking up small accounting software business, not software, but small accounting firms or whatever. These kind of things where you've got a really big distribution of small players that can all be picked up and integrated into the thing and expanded, and all the synergies of being able to publish them, market them, inject money into the teams and so on, and get them at cheaper prices because they're smaller, than not so liquid and so on, and having the expertise to be able to keep developing and publishing their IP. It's not something that like a private equity wouldn't be attractive to a private equity company to come along and just pick up a small developer for $5 or $10 million or whatever, because they wouldn't necessarily have the network and the links and so on to get the most out of that acquisition. So really attractive, and there's just literally probably in the thousands of great small development studios all over, and they're popping up all over the place with new guys. It's the barrier to entry of creating a development studio is tiny. You just, these guys, hobbyists creating games, expanding it out, and building up from there. And there is just this wealth of games, but those guys just get lost in the noise of all the games being released. And so it's really crucial to have that ability to, having the ability to publish and reach, have the marketing reach and so on, and the networks and everything with all of the distribution platforms and so on, is a really massive advantage, and really allows games that otherwise would have just disappeared by the wayside, like Hello Neighbor, for instance, one of tinyBuild's most successful titles, was not successful prior to being acquired. So it just really shows you the benefits of that tinyBuild can bring as a publisher of these games. So it's just an absolutely fertile ground for them to go around and pick up these small developers. And there's plenty of room for growth through this method. They're not going to run out of acquisition targets anytime soon. So the final acquisition of 2021 was the aforementioned acquire-hire of Dead Pixel, which took place in September. Moving to 2022, the company made a further 3 acquisitions, the first of which was the acquire-hire of D-Magic in April. What sets this transaction apart was that it involved purely the development team and not any IP. I believe D-Magic might have been particularly attractive to the company because of its porting capabilities, so porting games across between different platforms. Again, trying to improve that vertical integration capability of the company so they're not dependent on any external providers for any of these kind of crucial things that would otherwise, if they would otherwise limit the ability for them to release games and slow down the release if they don't have the in teams for this sort of in-house. So yeah, getting this in vertical integration is a real benefit to the company. So in August they made the opposite kind of transaction, acquiring only the IP of several Bossa Studios titles. And I just want to say here, so Bossa Studios, we'll get onto later, the chairman of the board, Henrique Olivier, I think is how you pronounce his name, is the CEO and founder of Bossa Studios. So there is this is, in a way, this is therefore a related party transaction. tinyBuild has acquired some titles from his company, effectively. Just worth mentioning there. Also in August, they hired Comfort Games, which is the maker of Despo's game, in a deal that involved both staff and IP, so another acquire-hire. So it will be instructive to look at a transaction in more detail so you have a better understanding of the typical deal structure. For this example, we'll focus on the acquisition of Doghelm, which again is the developer of Streets of Rogue, as it fits into the more standard acquire-hire model. The consideration for the deal includes both upfront and deferred payments over the following 3 years. The deferred payments are variable depending on stretching operational targets being met, but have a maximum total consideration of $6.5 million, split approximately 50-50 between cash and newly issued equity. As part of the initial consideration, the company issued 166,204 new common shares at a price of 254 pence per share, and these shares were subject to a 12-month lock-up period. A very crucial point here that applies to all the deals signed to date is that the compensation is based on cash values, and so the number of newly issued shares will vary depending on the share price. Given that the share price is currently 80% lower than the price at which the aforementioned deal was signed, we can expect dilution to be 5x that anticipated. This risk becomes even more substantial with the larger transactions made in the second half of 2021. I contacted investor relations with my concerns, and they told me that while they were valid, the management have put in place measures to mitigate against unanticipated levels of dilution. We'll have to wait until the annual results for financial year 2022 have been released before finding out exactly what these measures are, but I suspect they will involve share purchases on the market to offset dilution. So their results are coming out next week, so we should find them out pretty soon. The board has approved the creation of an employee benefit trust that will purchase shares on the open market for use in share-based compensation. This is funded by a loan from the company of up to $10 million, and a pre-closed trading statement released in January 2023 stated that the trust has purchased 154,300 shares. So it's already starting to make use to purchase shares for future compensation, share-based compensation. It's plausible that this employee benefit trust will be used to purchase shares to facilitate contingent consideration payments from acquisition deals, particularly in cases where the recipients are contracted employees of the company. Management stated in their H1 earnings call that they plan to make future acquisitions predominantly with cash while the share price remains at depressed levels, and have secured $35 million credit facility should larger deals require additional funding. So just to put this in perspective, I think right now they're contingent on their balance sheet. They've got contingent liabilities, which is why they recognise these share-based payments that owed for acquisitions, for deferred payments. They've estimated it based on what they think the performance of the acquirees is going to be. Because as I said, it was variable, the amount they would get, based on various metrics. I think adjusted EBITDA and stuff like that were some of them. Based on what they think the total could be for what they're recognising on the balance sheet, I think it's something like $11 million at the moment. And we'll go into these numbers later, but $11 million, to put that in perspective, the current share price of around about 50 pence a share would mean you'd be looking at something around the 18 to 20 million pound 18 to 20 million shares being issued, which would be a considerable amount of dilution, probably something like 8 to something like 8 to 10% dilution if they didn't take any action here, and that would be over a couple of years, because like I said, with the payments being over sort of 3 years for most deals. But yeah, quite considerable, and it's obviously a lot more than they were anticipating. They were probably thinking it was going to be about a fifth of that, so probably 1 to 2% dilution that they were expecting, really, or maybe 2 to 3% or something. But obviously a lot more, and so I think it's quite likely that they'll be hoovering up some shares on the market while they're currently at these depressed prices to offset that. And as I've said, they've got an awful lot of cash on the balance sheet still, and a credit facility as well of $35 million, which as of their last filings was undrawn. So yeah, got a lot of options. They could easily, it would make a lot of sense to, over the next couple of years, spend $10 million in cash to buy the required amount of shares. I think it's something like 4 million in the next this year coming, and then it'll be another 6 million or 7 million after that. So it's definitely something I'm hoping they're going to do, and it would make a lot of sense. And it's in the interests of the as we'll get onto later, the management still owns an absolute, a massive stake in the company, so it's very much in their interest to avoid this kind of dilution as well. But just something to bear in mind, that in the worst case scenario, if they didn't do anything, you could be looking at something close to 10% dilution in the next year. But anyway, I've been given assurances that's not going to happen exactly like that, or at least it'll be reduced. But we'll have to see. And I've asked if you want to. They've got an earnings call, I believe, on the 29th or maybe the 30th next week. If you go on, I think it's investormeetcompany.com. They're doing a public event earnings call, effectively, on their presentation, where anybody can join it, and is open to the public rather than just being an analyst only type thing. So yeah, you can join there and you can pre-ask questions. I've got a couple of questions loaded in, so hopefully they'll get answered. Pretty much covering this kind of thing. So one about the that dilution, as I was mentioning there, and the other question is more about when you see the executive compensation, it's largely based around adjusted EBITDA metrics, and I would have preferred it to be earnings per share based, so it would defend against these kind of growth in the level of earnings through dilution, effectively through buying companies by issuing shares, and therefore diluting but actually paying a price that means the earnings per share is reduced. So yeah, protecting against that, making sure that every acquisition, even if shares are issued, which is fine, and like as it fits with their model of trying to bring the developers into the company and having them feel like entrepreneurs within the company and so on, and still retaining effectively some ownership of their IP, so they're incentivized to keep working with the company and not to disappear off. And there's lock-in periods and so on, normally 12 months for each deal as well. So yeah, my key point here is that that would be beneficial, but there is still, I'm guessing the answer that comes back to me is probably for that particular one is going to be that they with the management's ownership, which I think is 37.5% for the CEO and 7% for the COO, which are the two original founders, is going to be enough to dissuade this kind of action. But yeah, and it's fine if they're issuing out these shares and then the earnings per share level is still actually increasing, so they're accretive deals effectively in that sense. It doesn't really matter too much if they are issuing shares to do it, as long as the overall earnings of the company attributable to each shareholder is still increasing. That's how I view it. Yeah, and they've obviously got these for the internal sort of share-based compensation. They've got this employee benefit trust. The reason I thought it might be possible that this employee benefit trust would be used for these kind of share-based compensations is that because these guys or girls that they're getting on from the development teams are now contracted employees of the company, that these deferred payments could potentially be seen as share-based compensation, because the amount is variable on their performance and so on. So it is very much like a sort of the company's annual bonus scheme or other things. Yeah. Anyway, moving on. Let's have a look at marketing. Now, this is an area that I think the company really excels and stands out from a lot of its competitors. So, and is one of the reasons why some of their, the Hello Neighbor franchises has been able to do so well. Let's have a look. tinyBuild takes a grassroots approach to marketing that has proven highly efficient and effective. The company has cultivated strong relationships with over 10,000 verified influencers that together have helped achieve over 5 billion content-related views on YouTube. Yeah, 5 billion. These relationships are highly symbiotic, as the games produced by tinyBuild are very suited to driving engagement, allowing influencers to monetize their channels while marketing the game on the company's behalf. The company also has a significant social media presence of its own, with more than 1.5 million followers across all social media platforms, giving them direct access to consumers when promoting upcoming titles. This is substantially more than comparable competitors, including Devolver Digital, Paradox Interactive, 11-Bit, and Team 17. So I think the closest one was Devolver Digital with 700,000. So yeah, it's a massive jump up from there in terms of the company's reach on social media. Another way in which the company directly connects with consumers is to involve them in alpha and beta testing. The feedback received is used to focus development on the most well-received game characteristics and thus ensure that titles reflect consumer trends on launch. Speaking to the efficiency of the company's marketing approach, they typically spend less than 7% of annual revenue on marketing. This figure is pretty astounding when you consider the reach they have been able to achieve. So another thing I want to mention before going on to the financials is employee retention. So tinyBuild want all their employees to feel and operate like entrepreneurs within the company. This is achieved in part by giving them equity stakes, but it also comes as a byproduct of the fact that most employees belong to groups that were originally independent development studios prior to their acquisition and still operate largely autonomously. That kind of devolved, decentralized operation called model. The company has a strong focus on employee welfare with strict policies against crunching. In a more extreme example, last year they spent $2 million evacuating all 50 of their staff members from Russia and relocating 30 staff members based in Ukraine to the western part of the country, away from the fighting. At one point, the CEO was even housing multiple families in his own home while more permanent accommodation was found for them. All these actions have cultivated a strong sense of loyalty among employees that is evidenced by the company having one of the lowest levels of staff turnover in the industry, in the low single digits compared to an industry average of 15.5%. They're very good stuff to read, really, when you look into these things. And that $2 million is pretty much a one-off exceptional cost to get everybody out. And just quite amazing that they did that. Took those steps to get the staff out and relocate them. Really shows that they do care for the workforce. Right, so let's now move on to have a look at the financials. I'll start with the income. So for the year ended 31st December 2021, revenue was $52,153,000 compared to financial year 2020, it was $37,648,000. So this is a 38.5% increase on the year before. This outstripped the growth in cost of sales, which was 19.8% growth, leaving gross profit margin improved at 65.3%. And so financial year 2020, it was 59.8%. Operating expenses for the period were $21,509,000, comprising general administrative expenses of $14,469,000, share-based payment expenses of $2,452,000, and IPO-related costs of $4,588,000. Subtracting these from the gross profit gives an operating profit figure of $12,532,000 compared to financial year 2020 of $7,664,000, and an operating profit margin of 24% compared to 2020 of 20.4%. Removing a further $8,000 for finance costs, so basically nothing, and $4,281,000 for income tax, we get the net profit of $8,243,000. This is 2020, which was $4,948,000, and net profit margin of 15.8% compared to financial year 2020 of 13.1%. This equates to 4.3 cents per share using the shares outstanding at the time, or 4 cents per share with the most recent share count, allowing for the dilution since then. Additionally, the management provides an adjusted EBITDA figure which removes depreciation and amortization, except for amortization of capitalized software development costs. So it removes the depreciation and amortization, but not the amortization of software development costs, which are seen as standard sort of expenses, effectively. And share-based payment costs, acquisition costs, other non-recurring items, IPO-related costs, and other operating income, which was nil in 2021, but had a small value the year before. From the operating profit figure, after excluding this rather long list of items, we get an adjusted EBITDA figure of 22,239,000 compared to financial year 2020 of 15,275,000. In the notes to the financial statements, we are given a breakdown of the company's revenue by class and timing. We can see that games and merchandise royalties made up the majority of revenues, with smaller contributions from development services and events. So development services also includes creating games sort of on commission, having games commissioned by like Microsoft or whatever like that to be released on their platform or whatever. But it also includes obviously now that they've got like companies that do porting and stuff like that. If they've not got enough titles to fill all their time with porting so on, they'll do stuff at third parties, and similarly with quality assurance and things like that, they'll do stuff for third parties as well. So that would count as still as development services income, revenue there. So yeah, I'll let you guys have a look at the figures yourselves. But generally, it's the largest contribution is coming from games and merchandise royalties, and then probably around about a quarter of it of that figure is then coming from development services, and then 805,000 from events, which is the DevGam stuff. We also do a breakdown by timing of revenue, so you can see that effectively it's just adding the games and merchandise royalty revenues to the events revenue is transferred at a specific point in time. So that's just paid on an event or whatever, on an event occurring like a delivery of a game or whatever, and then you've got, or hosting an event in a physical event, and then you've got the development services are transferred over a period of time. So if they're developing a game and getting some prepayment from Microsoft or whatever, they'll get some. It's very much the model that they would use if they're commissioning a developer to develop a game. They'll give them some initial payment, and then it'll be as they hit different milestones, they'll get paid there. And so that's the development services are transferred over time, so the figures exactly match there. So the company's game and merchandise royalty revenue can be further divided between own IP and third-party IP. In financial year 2021, own IP generated 30,640,000, and in financial year 2020, this was 24,683,000 in revenue, and third-party IP generated 9,231,000 compared to the previous year of 9,239,000. It's interesting to see from these figures that all the growth in royalty revenue for the year came from own IP rather than third-party IP, which is in line with their stated strategy. So yeah, they're doing about the same level of third-party publishing effectively, but growing their own IP substantially as they're bringing in new stuff and just producing more stuff internally. So that's what they wanted to focus on. So it's now about the own IP is generating 3 times the revenue of the third party stuff. So moving on to H1 2022, revenue came in at 28,750,000 compared to H1 of 2021 of 18,626,000, with a gross profit margin of 68.5%. This was compared to H1 2021 of 70.7%. So the gross profit margin decreased slightly due to the consolidation of lower margin businesses, in this case Versus Evil and Red Cerberus. So yeah, the game service business is going to be lower margin, and obviously we were saying that Versus Evil is pretty much exclusively a third-party publisher at the time of acquisition, so lower margin as well. So the Versus Evil, the publisher, can certainly be increased, the margins there, so you expect that to go up, but obviously having the services business, it's unlikely for those margins to massively increase. That's expected to think, but obviously it has a lot of other benefits to the rest of the business. So operating profit was 6,805,000 compared to 689,000 for H1 2021, calculated by subtracting $12 million in administrative expenses and 887,000 in share-based payments expenses from the gross profit figure of 19,692,000 compared to H1 21 of 13,177,000. The substantial increase over the prior year can be explained by the fact that the IPO related costs were front loaded in the first half of 2021. Net profit for the period was 4,483,000 compared to a $297,000 loss in H1 2021, equating to 2.2 cents per share, and in H1 2021 a 0.1 cents per share loss. So again, due to the loss, the costs being substantially front loaded from the IPO and so on in the first half of the year. So management's adjusted EBITDA figure was given as 9,882,000 versus 7,905,000 in H1 2021. This figure accounts for exceptional expenses of $1 million incurred during the relocation of staff out of Ukraine and Russia during the conflict. So yeah, $1 million was recognised in the first half, but subsequently this has gone up to $2 million for expenses in the second half. And that includes like legal costs and so on, getting visas for everyone sorted and all that kind of stuff for relocating them. Quite an expensive process. So revenue contributions from own IP increased to 83% versus 78% in H1 2021, driven by strong organic performance and the recent IP acquisitions, e.g. Deadside. There was only one game released during H1 2022, and 99% of revenue came from the back catalogue, so we can expect H2 revenue to be boosted by the release of 8 new titles. Yeah, pretty much all the releases were backloaded to the second half of the year, so pretty phenomenal that they had such good performance in the first half when it was all coming from the 99%, so pretty much all of it coming from the back catalogue. Breaking down the revenues by class, we can see that development services made up a much larger share of H1 revenues in 2022 than in 2021. Red Cerberus is likely to have contributed to this, along with payments for platform deals signed ahead of game releases in H2 2022. Yeah, so it was development services were 11,134,000 and they were 224,000 in H1 2021. Games and merchandise royalty revenues can again be divided into own IP of 13,107,000 versus 14,100,000 for H1 2021, and third party IP of 4,359,000. H1 2022 was 4,050,000. So just a point here that the games and merchandise royalties revenue actually decreased, but the development services revenue massively increased. So it was one overcompensated for the other. And like I say, a lot of this is because of we've got some development services stuff from Red Cerberus, but also largely it's going to be prepayments from Microsoft or whatever for the releasing their games, the upcoming releases in the second half of the year on their platforms, giving them payments to get them sort of pre-locked in to put onto their put the games on their subscription service. You'll notice that the contribution from own IP as a percentage of royalty revenues decreased from the previous year, 75% versus 78%, while the percentage of overall revenues increased, 83% versus 78%. This was due to a greater share of own IP revenues coming from development services in H1 2022. Looking back over revenue figures for the management has provided, which includes a number of years when the company was unlisted, we can see very substantial sustained growth at a compound annual rate of 44.56%. So going from $11.94 million in 2017 to $52.15 million in 2021. Gross margins have shown a similarly positive trend with the move towards first and second party publishing. And you can see here, we've gone from 48.48% gross margin in 2017, dipped down to 44% in 2018, but then climbed each year up to 65.27% in 2021. So yeah, this is with that move towards the first and second party publishing and bringing in the own IP, has significantly increased the gross margins by sort of close to 20%. So net income has been a little more bumpy with some negative years, but the overall growth has been sizable, and it looks set to remain more sustainably positive now the company has grown and diversified. Yeah, so we had a couple of 2019 was a negative year, 2017 was a negative year, but the 2020 and 2021 both positive, and also 2018. Yeah, and you've got to remember this is a rapidly growing company, and so that with the expansion of their IP and revenue base and what have it, sources of revenue and so on, and business model expanding out into from 2017, when they bought, in that time they've developed their first franchise and started doing the games as a service. So all this stuff's happened very rapidly in that period. So the business back in 2017 was pretty unrecognizable compared to the business today. Much more of the third party focused, and still dependent on the third party releases. And this is the kind of thing you see much more with the purely third party publishers, is where they don't have their own IP. Like I think Devolver Digital's a bit like would fit that bill, for instance, and they're still having the big swings from year to year, and the going in negative some years and so on. This shift away from that really leads to the sustained positive profitability over time without the sort of cyclicality elements to it, certainly to the same degree. Right, so let's have a look at, let me just have a quick sip of water. Right, so let's have a quick look at the balance sheet. So at the 30th of June 2022, tinyBuild had total assets of 127,226,000, of which 70,183,000 were non-current and 57,043,000 were current. The vast majority of the non-current assets are intangible, 69,019,000, split into software development costs of 29,728,000, purchased intellectual property of 20,439,000, customer relationships of 3,906,000, brands of 1,744,000, and goodwill of 13,220,000. Now, of course, with this, when you're seeing like things like brands and goodwill and customer relationships, those are all things, or even intellectual property, those are all things that are only recognised when they have made an acquisition. So internally developed IP and stuff like that, I wouldn't think would appear on the balance sheet at all in this form. So yeah, in the future, you can expect a lot of this to be potentially understated as well, in terms of the actual cash generative power of the company will be substantially more potentially than what we're seeing on the balance sheet here. So yeah, current assets comprised $14,431,000 of trade and other receivables, and $42,612,000 of cash and cash equivalents. So yeah, some of this is the proceeds from the IPO, of course, but a lot of that's been deployed, and then the rest of it is going to be just what their operation's been generating, which is substantial. All software development costs are capitalized and so recognized as an asset on the balance sheet, which is amortized over time, allowing them to be matched to the subsequent revenues they generate. These costs largely relate to amounts paid to external developers, consultancy costs, and the direct payroll costs of the internal development teams. External software development costs are amortized over the life of the game, which varies with the game's success. But internal software development costs are amortized over a fixed period, usually 1 to 2 years. In both cases, amortization begins once the game is released. Looking at the other intangible assets, brands are amortized on a straight line basis over 15 years, and both customer relationships and intellectual property are amortized on a straight line basis over 7 years. On the other side of the ledger were total liabilities of $23,961,000, with $9,253,000 of this non-current and $14,708,000 current. The non-current components were contingent consideration of $6,336,000, deferred tax liabilities of $2,716,000, and lease liabilities of $201,000. Contingent consideration relates to the expected value in shares that will be issued to satisfy deferred payments for acquisitions, as we talked about previously. Yeah, and you notice that the non-current component there was $6.336 million, which is what I was sort of saying. And then you see here in the current that it's $4.793 million. Contingent consideration is expected to be owed in the coming year. Yeah, so current liabilities include trade and other payables of $45,000, contingent consideration of $4,793,000, and lease liabilities of $270,000. The current liabilities are well covered by current assets, with a current ratio of 3.88, or 5.75 if you exclude the contingent consideration. So it's also worth noting, I haven't really talked about it here, but the trade and other receivables that I mentioned, which were $14.431 million. Those are all pretty much all owed by the large distribution platforms: Steam, Epic Games, Microsoft, Nintendo, Sony, and so on. And so pretty low default risk, but I think the terms are normally like 30 to 45 days or something. So when the company recognizes the revenue immediately on the sale of a game, they're notified that the sale's been made, but they won't actually receive the cash for another 30 to 45 days afterwards, is how it normally works. But yeah, they've never had a default, and it's pretty unlikely that any of them will default. Just good to know that they are quite concentrated between a relatively small group of, albeit blue chip, customers in this sense, for the actual payment of the cash. Right, so Subtracting the total liabilities from the total assets gives us the total equity of $103,265,000 to $103,250,000, of which is attributable to shareholders. So the other 15,000 is attributable to non-controlling entities. In this case, I think it will be Lerica Malieva. Using the average equity figure for financial year 2021 of $67,601,000 and the operating profit for the same year of $12,532,000, we can calculate the return on equity, ROE, as 18.5%. This figure is being somewhat depressed by the substantial amount of cash on the balance sheet. I expect ROE to be significantly higher once this cash is deployed into productive assets. It's also worth mentioning that while the company doesn't currently have any debt on their balance sheet, it does have $35 million. It does have a $35 million credit facility set up with Bank of America, which is not Silicon Valley Bank for anybody that's worried about that, which is intended as a source of cash should it be required for future acquisitions. As with the most recent filings, this facility was undrawn. Cash flows. For the year ended 31st of December 2021, cash flows from operations were $13,290,000 compared to financial year 2020 of $16,470,000. The decrease from the previous year was due predominantly to the increase in receivables exceeding the increase in payables in 2021. The princely sum of $37,656,000 was invested during the year, compared to financial year 2020 of $7,143,000. So this figure is split between $11,784,000 for the acquisition of subsidiaries, net of cash acquired, $15,085,000 for software development, and $10,832,000 for the purchase of intellectual property. This investment was in part funded by the proceeds of share issuances during the year, which amounted to $46,839,000 net of transaction costs. So a lot of that would have come from the IPO. The overall net increase in operating cash during the year came to $22,519,000 compared to financial year 2020 of $9,304,000. It's important to note that the company was highly cash generative before the IPO and would have been able to sustainably grow even without going public. The funds raised have simply accelerated growth. In H1 2022, cash generated from operations was $8,811,000 compared to H1 2021 of $570,000 used in operations as opposed to generated. A total of $14,245,000 was invested in software development and $554,000 in property, plant and equipment. So I think a lot of that was to do with setting up offices for the relocated development teams from Russia and Ukraine. There wasn't much in the way of financing activities beyond the payment of $148,000 in dividends to a non-controlling interest related to DevGam LLC. So we talked about already. That was probably the it was the payment of dividends to Lerica. The net movement of cash during the period was a decrease of $6,220,000. Looking back over the operating cash flows for the last 5 years, we can see substantial growth. So they've gone from just over $1 million in 2017 to $13.29 million in 2021, which is down a little bit from $16.47 million in 2020. So I'm going to have a quick sip and we'll have a look at management. The company's chief executive officer and founder is Alex Nishiporchik. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Prior to founding tinyBuild, Alex was a pro gamer and games journalist. He has since produced over 20 games and led the way in building the company's marketing, including forming relationships with key influencers. From the earnings calls, Alex comes across as highly competent with a very clear vision and strategy for the company. He also holds a very substantial stake, amounting to 37.8% of the shares outstanding, making him well aligned with other shareholders. Luke Burtis is also a founder and serves as the company's chief operating officer. He has established long-term partnerships with over 50 developers as well as multiple global distribution platforms and built the team from 3 employees in 2013 to 127 across the globe at year-end 2021. Luke and others close to him hold a stake in the company equating to 7% of the shares outstanding. Tony Asenza is the company's chief financial officer. He has completed 6 acquisitions, managed multiple investments into tinyBuild, and built the financial infrastructure to deal with the company's growth. I believe tinyBuild is his first major role, but he too comes across well in the earnings calls with an obvious understanding of the economics of the business. The company's chairman is Enrique Oliviers, CEO and co-founder of London-based games developer and publisher Bossa Studios. Enrique has 23 years games industry experience, including working at Jagex and Playfish. So I know Jagex makes RuneScape. And they're based in Cambridge, I believe, in the UK. The company has 2 non-executive directors, the first of which is Neil Cato, CFO of AIM-listed Boohoo Group plc. Neil is also a qualified chartered accountant. The second non-executive director is Nick Van Dyke. Every time I read that, I keep thinking Dick Van Dyke, which is obviously the famous actor from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Anyway, Nick Van Dyke with an N. Co-president of Activision Blizzard Studios from 2015 to 2019, and before that, senior VP of the Walt Disney Company. He has more than 20 years' experience in the entertainment industry. The guy is a heavy hitter and brings valuable knowledge about developing games as a service products and franchises. Franchises obviously being a key component of Walt Disney's business model, for instance. Executive compensation includes a base salary, cash-based bonus, and stock options. For financial year 2021, the base salaries were $350,000, $308,000, and $220,000 for the CEO, COO, and CFO, respectively. All 3 received the same annual bonus of $420,000. Alex Nishiporchik and Luke Burtis both retain significant equity stakes in the company on IPO, and so were not issued any stock options in the year. Tony Asenza was granted 125,931 options with an exercise price of $1.59 per share. These are now underwater and will expire on the 1st of February 2031 unless exercised. I expect the Employee Benefit Trust will be offsetting any future shareholder dilution from equity-based executive compensation by purchasing an equivalent number of shares on the market. Annual bonus awards, and I expect future stock options also, are dependent in equal measure on revenue and adjusted EBITDA. The targets are not specified for financial year 2021, but I'd prefer this to be earnings per share, which defends against excessive use of stock in acquisitions, but will have to rely on management's substantial equity stakes to disincentivize earnings dilution. So I talked about that earlier, and I said I'd put a question in for the earnings call on, I believe, the 30th of March. So we'll have to see if they respond to that question. They get to it in the list. I think there's going to be a lot of questions, but maybe getting it in early before the call might be there. We'll see. I did do it for another company before, and it was the first question asked. So maybe the fact that I've done it a couple of weeks in advance might mean it gets answered. We'll see. The other directors are paid an annual fee, which was $120,000 for Enrique Olivieres, $70,000 for Neil Cato, and $100,000 for Nick Van Dyke. Enrique's fee for 2021 was satisfied with the allotment of 51,454 shares at the placing price. Other major shareholders were Swedbank Robur AB with 8.2%, NetEase with 6.3%, and Franklin Templeton Investments with 5%. It's worth noting that NetEase was a Chinese company. They I think probably venture capital or something like that, Chinese venture capital, which gave them some initial pre-IPO capital while they were still a private company to help them grow a little bit. I think that was perhaps back in 2018 or something, if I'm remembering correctly. But yeah, as part of that, they've obviously retained a 6.3% stake in the company. So finally, let's have a quick look at the valuation. And it really doesn't take much of a look to realise this is pretty crazily cheap. So let's have a look. It doesn't take much torturing of the numbers to see this company is incredibly cheap. On some simple valuation metrics like trailing PE, POCF, the price to operating cash flows, and even PB, price to book, the company is very modestly priced when compared to the strength of its business model and long runway for growth. Using a market capitalization of $125.56 million, so changing it to dollars for easy comparison with the financials, which are actually all in dollars, but the actual share is actually listed in pounds, or a share price of 62 cents, its trailing PE, POCF and PB are 9.7, 5.5 and 1.2 respectively. With these numbers, you're literally paying for zero growth. When you realize that these multiples are being applied to a company that has grown revenue and cash flows from operations over the last 5 years at compound rates of 44.56% and 87.29% respectively, you can see there's a yawning chasm between price and value. So yeah, it's probably the most promising company in my portfolio. Just getting a company that grows like this, that's growing like this with this kind of quality of business for this kind of price is very, very rare indeed. So yeah, I'm very, very bullish on it. That my only major concern really is the share dilution, but they are definitely taking steps in the right direction with that, recognizing that future acquisitions are going to be much more heavily focused on cash payments rather than shares. I think there will still be some shares issued, but probably substantially less than they were doing before when the share price was a lot higher, and that's evidenced by the fact that they've got this credit facility in place now, which they didn't have before, or not to the same level. I think it was just a year long, and it was probably just $10 million, something like that, or maybe I think it might have been 25 million, but it was completely undrawn before, and they now extended it 3 years, and it's now $35 million. And the fact that they've got this employee benefit trust in place to purchase shares on the open market, to then be used to issued out for like paying the executives and company-wide compensation as well. I think everybody's able to participate in probably share matching schemes and so on. So yeah, it's they're definitely moving in the right direction, and it gives you a lot of comfort that the management has such substantial stakes, 37.8 and 7% respectively for the two main guys, and then obviously the CFO is building up his stake. They didn't specify any like minimum requirements, whether he has to get to like 200% of his salary or something like that minimal, but maybe that'll be we'll told that in future years. But anyway, the main decision makers being the CEO and COO are and have massive stakes in the company, so massively their interests are certainly aligned, and they're going to be wanting to avoid dilution as much as we are. So yeah, very promising. Very happy with it. I've built up a position myself. It's been a company I've been following since the IPO. I did actually have a small position soon after the IPO when I wasn't so focused on value at the time, and it did actually I think it did end up at something like falling 80% or something from the price I bought it, around about £2.50 a share or something. But like I say, it was just a small position at that time, and it's nice. It's been nice to actually I just held it in my portfolio all that time as it dropped, because I could see the quality of the company back then, but like I say, I wasn't paying as much attention as I should have been to the valuation. But yeah, it's just a nice for my own sort of investment process and so on, to be able to go back to a company that I've effectively lost 80% on and say, wow, this is now an absolute screaming bargain, and I paid too much for it before, but potentially it probably would still work out in the long term, but certainly in hindsight it looked like I paid too much. But now being able to get it at sort of a below 10 PE, just crazy. And going back through the company and revisiting it as I have done, putting in all the work now to do this write-up, and and massively increasing my position from what it was before. So yeah. Anyway, that's all I've got. So yeah, thanks for reading, and go over. You can read the full write-up over on firmreturns.com. I'll probably put a link in the description to this podcast, the notes of this podcast anyway. But yeah, have a look at firmreturns.com, and you'll find various other things on there and more information. If you happen to have stumbled across this podcast, there's sort of and a README page to find out a bit more about newsletter. You can subscribe to other issues of the newsletter to get them straight in your inbox. It's all free. I'm also on Twitter at firmreturns, capital F, capital R. But yeah, thanks a lot for listening. I'll see you all on the next one.